The Belt and Road Initiative. President Xi Jinping's signature strategy in foreign policy has transitioned from theory to practice. It provides to developing countries what they need most: infrastructure, roads, railways, ports, airports, power plants, oil and gas pipelines and refineries, and free trade zones, as well as supporting IT, telecom, and financial services. During the first 8 months of 2016, almost 4,000 engineering contracts were signed by Chinese companies in 61 countries along the Belt and Road, with a combined contract value of almost $70 billion US. Chinese enterprises have established 52 economic cooperation zones in Belt and Road countries, while paying $900 million in local taxes and creating nearly 70,000 local jobs. But how do Belt and Road projects actually work? What are the processes, challenges, criticisms, and risks? Only by digging into real-world detail of real-world projects can we get closer to China. Eurasia, the greatest continent in the world, the cradle of several civilizations. Across this continent, there stands a network of routes that connect east and west, the ancient Silk Road. In September 2013, during his visit to Kazakhstan, China's President Xi Jinping proposed the Belt and Road Initiative.
为了使欧亚各国经济联系更加紧密，相互合作
To forge closer economic ties, deepen cooperation, and expand development in the Eurasia region, we should seize the initiative and together build an economic belt along the Silk Road. This great undertaking will benefit people in every country along the route.
The Silk Road Economic Belt, together with the 21st century maritime Silk Road, covers more than 60 countries. According to President Xi, the initiative focuses on connectivity and cooperation. Today, 3 years have passed, and China is injecting new vitality into the ancient trade routes, seeking shared prosperity. On October 5, 2016, Ethiopia and Djibouti launched the first fully electrified cross-border railway line in Africa. With a total length of more than 750 kilometers, the railway links Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa, to the Red Sea port of Djibouti. Traveling at 120 kilometers per hour, the new service cuts the otherwise 3-day journey down to about 12 hours. The $3.4 billion project is a prominent example of China building infrastructure under the Belt and Road Initiative.
The journey from Addis Ababa to Djibouti by road used to take more than 4 days. Now it will take a matter of hours. This will increase Ethiopia's competitiveness in the international market.
This belongs to two nations. It will help people from both countries travel and transport goods. We need to protect it and value it.
Developing countries are eager to modernize, and an interconnected infrastructure system is the first major step to realize that dream. At the same time, China is expanding its own infrastructure at a pace faster than any other country in the world. The Belt and Road Initiative will accelerate China providing its expertise in infrastructure construction for global markets and thus stimulate cross-border infrastructure construction. The Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway is a good example.
We used to have many challenges exporting vegetables from Ethiopia to Djibouti every week. Because of repeated transport delays, many traders have closed down their businesses.
If you're a trader, you can now get your goods easily and on time. The railway is going to have a positive impact on both nations' economies.
To learn more about the railway project and how Belt and Road projects work in general, I speak with Liu Wei, Chief Engineer and Vice President of China Railway Group, which constructed the Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway, and Professor Wang Yiwei of Renmin University of China, an expert on the Belt and Road who has been following the initiative from its beginning. The Belt and Road Initiative has been discussed greatly by many academics and many theoreticians about the importance of this project. But you've been involved in the real world of actual projects, important projects that are part of the Belt and Road Initiative, in particular, the Ethiopia-Djibouti Railroad. I want to understand that project, how it got started, what the structure is, what the stages are, because that's the real substance of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Ethiopia, as a landlocked country in East Africa, needs a pathway out to the sea. Therefore, when China put forth the idea, the country responded with great interest and attached great importance to the project. Ethiopia has long desired such a program, but was unable to carry it out due to lack of funding and resources. But China is different. Technically and financially, we could all offer our help.
Let's talk about some specifics. How long is the railway? When was it first started in terms of the planning? What were the stages involved? What were the challenges at different stages? I want to get into the real depth of the project.
The whole Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway extends for a total length of 752.7 kilometers. As we have fully considered its expected increase in transport capacity, the railway is designed to achieve a speed of 120 kilometers an hour and an annual transport capacity of 20 million tons. During the actual construction, we met with three problems: the problem of funding, technology, and staff. First, railway construction needs money. Where does that money come from? One important reason for Ethiopia to cooperate with China is funding. Apart from the funds raised by itself, Ethiopia needed financial support from China, as the total project cost about $4 billion. The section under our management extends from Addis Ababa to Misob. Another section from Misob to Djibouti is contracted to the China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation. So out of the total $4 billion, we invested $1.846 billion. Ethiopia only invested about 30%, which was locally raised. The rest of the 70% comes from financing support from the Chinese government. Therefore, Ethiopia has got its funding for the railway with a buyer's credit. This is how it addresses the primary funding problem while seeking help from China. So essentially, this is a commercial loan program. In order to promote the railway construction, the Chinese government and the relevant financial institutes have all offered a lot of support through lending.
I've heard of some projects that have been less successful than the Ethiopia-Djibouti railway in Venezuela, for example. What are some examples of projects internationally that you've worked on which maybe are not as successful? Why weren't they successful in the same way? And what are you doing to improve upon them?
Some railway projects under construction do encounter stoppages. I first went to the Ethiopia-Djibouti section around 2010, when it had been under construction for about 8 years. A major reason for the problem is perhaps lack of funding. Foreign contractors mostly worship money. Without money, never expect them to do anything. Just to take the example of the Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway, we signed the contract in 2012, but the government funding couldn't be in place that quickly. Therefore, our corporation itself prepared $100 million for the construction just to show our sincerity. It was quite risky. If ever the Chinese government did not approve of the funding program, we would still have $200 million invested in the project. And if the project gets seriously delayed, we would suffer tremendous risks. However, China's political system is different. Thanks to our reporting lines to the Chinese government, the funding program for the railway had soon been approved. Even so, we still take a lot of risks. It's impossible for foreign countries to do the same thing. Chinese companies going abroad do bring us a lot of benefits. But we are also trying our best to think in others' shoes and help them develop to achieve a win-win situation. This is where we differ the most compared to Western countries.
When you invest money, wherever it comes from, a bank, private equity, government, somebody is taking a financial risk. So in these projects, as you look at them, who is taking the financial risk?
Jointly. If these projects invest, for instance, in Pakistan, it's a Chinese-Pakistan government to share the responsibility and the risks of that.
So it's two governments.
Yeah, two governments. And then two governments play the creditor of that. But some countries cannot provide that. For instance, the Chinese-Japanese high-speed railway invest in Indonesia. And the Indonesian government cannot provide creditor for the investment. But China win the bid because Chinese state-owned enterprises, we can be the creditor of that. That's the China Development Bank. So this is privileges of the so-called China model, that the government and the market, two driving forces for the economic growth, not just one driving forces.
So in that case, though, if it's Chinese construction companies, but they're state-owned enterprises, so so both the financing and the corporate risk are both from the Chinese government, right?
Not directly Chinese government, but it's a state-owned enterprises. Yes, some countries, some people argue that the risks are very high because all rely on the Chinese Foreign Reserve or Treasury Department. This is it's a problem. So we should have some serious investigation on the risks of the investment.
How has China been dealing with some projects that have had problems? China has had a very large investment, for example, in Venezuela. It's not on the Belt and Road technically, but it has some of the same kinds of characteristics where there's now been both economic turbulence due to the drop in the price of oil, obviously, and political turbulence after the death of Chavez and opposition groups, and every day there's some story about it. Chinese people may not like the fact that a lot of billions of dollars are being wasted when we still have needs here in China.
Definitely, we learned the lessons from that. And Venezuela's model is a Chinese Development Bank invest. So this is Chinese money. But Belt and Road Initiative, we highlight the principles of the international standard and the market principle. So this is where make money. It's not just a foreign assistance or on prices invest. So maybe some project, because the infrastructure building, long term, not easy to make money in the short term. So maybe state-owned enterprises play some role at the beginning. But later, more private companies will join. And I think they care about the profits. And then Belt and Road Initiative basically should make the other private companies play a more important role, not just rely on the state-owned enterprises.
In terms of the risks involved, I assume that China Railway Group has very low risks because the financing is taken by other sources, so you get the money for your workers and your project. But the ultimate risk, perhaps, is with the financing sources, because many of the countries that the Belt and Road Initiative has projects in, like very expensive railway projects, are not the most stable countries in the world. There's political risk, there's sometimes ethnic conflict in these countries. Is that a concern as you look to the future?
应该说，对于每一个项目啊。
Fairly speaking, in every project our company operates, we work with a strong sense of responsibility. Preliminary work such as market evaluation, upfront research, feasibility studies and risk analysis have all been properly prepared. Therefore, we handed in our R&D report to the Financial Institute because we believe there is basically no risk of default. Financial institutions do not easily lend just because they get a report. They have their own internal evaluation procedures which require further understanding and tracking of the project before a final evaluation. Still more, they ask for insurance. So the lending bank has to cooperate with the insurance companies and communicate with foreign countries to perform the legal procedures. Banks only lend when they think the project has the capacity to pay back. So not every project gets a loan. There has to be an evaluation which proves the project can generate reliable returns, whether it is for the long term or the short term. So the commercial mechanism prevents default.
In fact, Belt and Road countries are no stranger to China's assistance. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Chinese government sent thousands of engineers and construction workers to help build the railroad linking Tanzania and Zambia, after both had achieved their independence from colonial rule. The construction of the 1,860-kilometer broad-gauge Tanzania-Zambia Railway, which was called a Road of Friendship by local people, began in 1970 and was completed in 1975, taking 4 years, 8 months to complete. The Belt and Road Initiative has a different model than the traditional form of charitable foreign aid in that its primary project financing mode is a public-private partnership, PPP, and that partnership makes the difference.
The Chinese government issues loans to them, and bank lending comes with interest. They have to pay back both capital and interest. Then, how should the Ethiopian government pay back the loan? We need to communicate with their government and also the Ethiopian railway companies. I think the money mainly comes from the following two sources. First, after construction, direct income from freight and ticket revenues can be used to pay back the loans, because they expect an increase in the railway's transport capacity and volume, which adds up to their ability to pay. Second, as we designed the railway, we also considered its boosting of the whole region around Ethiopia. So we have mapped out development of basic industrial parks in many important cities along the way. Currently, Chinese companies have already started investment in cities like Adama, where an industrial park covering about 80 square kilometers will be delivered to our China Railway Group and Chinese local governments for joint investment and development. Therefore, the economic returns add up to the project revenue and make it more capable of paying back the loans. So railways indeed create social benefits and help the economy grow. But repayment in this way is a bit time-consuming, at least decades long.
In 2015, China had direct investment of a little under 15 billion US dollar equivalents in roughly 50 different countries. And that was about 1/10 of China's overall foreign investment, a little under 150 billion. So that's about 1/10. Do you see that percentage increasing in the future? What do you see in terms of China's appetite for direct investment in the Belt and Road countries, all of which are developing and many of which have problems of stability, so the political risk, various other kinds of physical risk is higher?
Yes. In the past 3 years, government took the leading role to reach consensus, even sign an MOU with different nations. So far, more than 100 nations, international organizations, including United Nations, welcome Belt and Road Initiative. 36 around countries signed an MOU to jointly build Belt and Road Initiative, and more than 26 countries signed a treaty or deal with Chinese government for international capacity cooperation. So this is means they're quite welcome in the world. But later, I think it should more companies to play the major role, not just the government. So the companies want to make money. After the global financial crisis for nearly 1 decade, so they needed new directions of investment, particularly for Chinese economy. We suffered greatly from the global financial crisis. Chinese foreign reserve, more than $4 trillion US dollars, now less, but still more than $3 trillion US dollars. According to the economist, I think $600 billion US dollars for Chinese economy, foreign reserve, is enough. So most of them, not just buy the federal bonds of the United States, should invest. So where to invest? Originally, we think about investing in a Western country because they're stable, because of their legal system and environment protection, very good. But risks, profits, always combine together. So the higher potential for investment is the Belt and Road countries. Maybe it's unstable. Maybe environment, legal system is not so good. Even 16 of them, not WTO members. But huge potential for economic growth. And then because of the suffered of their infrastructure shortage, for instance, in Africa, 500 million without electricity. India, more than 300 million people without electricity.
We're talking about the benefits to Ethiopia and the specific project, East Africa in general, and there are certainly substantial benefits to the local economy, as you're saying. But there's also benefits to China. So let's be very open about the benefits to China and to China Railway.
Benefits to China Railway are mainly reflected in three aspects. First, with construction of this railway, we are proving the possibility for China to export its complete set of technology and equipment, as well as its vertical integration, from design, purchase and construction to operation. It will greatly enhance China Railway's international image and strengthen our international competitiveness. Second, construction of the railway can deliver real economic benefits to us. Through construction of the railway, we accumulate more experience in exporting our vertical integration and set up a good model for our next move of doing the same thing for high-speed railways. This project also helps us train our international financial management experts, something which will become both an important part of our international image and a strong motivator for our sustainable development in the future. Based on the above three analyses, I think construction of this railway greatly benefits our company.
I hear two kinds of criticisms of China's outgoing projects, not necessarily yours in particular, but in general when China finances these very large projects overseas, particularly in Africa. On the one hand, the foreign criticism, which I know you know, is that China is doing this to get raw materials and send in manufactured goods, and it becomes like a new kind of colonialism where you're not invading the country, but you have an economic dependency that you're creating by taking raw materials, paying for it, sending back Chinese manufactured projects. Criticism I hear in China is very different. It says that China is spending a lot of money with these very favorable loans, long-term loans on faraway places when maybe that money is better used in China itself, because China is very imbalanced in terms of its populations economically, and maybe China should spend that money rather than in faraway places, spend it right here in China.
First of all, personally, I think the first criticism is neither objective nor practical. It is a pseudo-proposition. Talking about China's going abroad, in the example of Africa, China has actually provided Africa with a lot of economic assistance. I remember former Prime Minister of Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, once commented, "Western countries' assistance to Africa is based upon plunder of its wealth. But China's assistance is upon help to the country's economy." This is not our self-evaluation, but evaluation from the Prime Minister. I think it speaks for the full recognition we get in the countries to which we offer economic assistance and investment. Also, if we look back to the 70s when we invested a lot of manpower and resources to help build the 1861-kilometre Tanzania-Zambia railway, which is a metre-gauge railway, fairly speaking, construction of the railway has greatly promoted the economic development of Tanzania and Zambia. And our 50,000 workers in foreign countries have exerted their painstaking efforts to finish the construction in 6 years without asking for any returns. Even today, our investment and construction in Africa and other places still bring us certain benefits. So we still think about returns when we make the investment. But more importantly, we're sharing with the recipient country our technologies, experience, and capital advantages accumulated over the past decades of development. Many cases of such investment tell the same story. We all know that during the decades since the reform and opening up, China has achieved tremendous development and never ceased its development in infrastructure. In addition, China has a lot of foreign reserves, which are to be invested in the international markets. From within the country, we can export manpower and materials. All these elements contribute to the prosperity of China's infrastructure today. The network of our high-speed railways, highways and urban rail transit system has witnessed steady growth during the 12th five-year plan period and will continue to do so in the 13th five-year plan period. We should say China has invested quite a lot of manpower, materials, and particularly finance in improving its infrastructure. Improvement of the infrastructure greatly boosts the development of China's economy. Without investment in infrastructure, our economy could not possibly have attained the level it enjoys today. Therefore, we should take a rational view of this issue. We are not taking the money for domestic infrastructure out for development abroad. As I said, different arrangements meet different needs, and the currencies are different. For investing abroad, we are using our foreign reserves in US dollars, while for investment domestically, we use RMB. The large amount of international trade creates for us a trade surplus, and the increasing foreign reserve encourages more Chinese companies to go abroad for development of the foreign country economy and the company itself through market-oriented investment.
Some would say that one of the motivations that China has for the Belt and Road policy is to restructure its own economy by reducing overcapacity, by either selling the output of steel and chemical plants that China has, aluminum, or glass, or actually dismantling the plants and then shipping them to foreign countries so that all the energy intensity and the pollution would go to foreign countries. And so this is a motivation that China has for the Belt and Road.
This capacity in China maybe is too much, but for the other countries, it's where you need. It's not polluted. Even electricity, as I said, is very needed in many countries. Today, with Chinese smart electricity network, very popular. Chinese technology, after 3 decades of the open reform, I think make a huge progress in this, not repeat in the early of the 1980s.
Perhaps the world's biggest and most intractable problem is global imbalances, unequal incomes, and lopsided lifestyles among regions and countries. Though we should always help our fellow human beings, we also help the poor because it makes our world more stable. Extreme poverty and gross inequalities are fertile breeding grounds for volatility and extremism. China's track record of constructing infrastructure is unparalleled in history, and by helping develop Belt and Road countries, China benefits the world. But benefits must flow in both directions. Increasing prosperity of Belt and Road countries improves the longer-term trade outlook for China, both the amount of trade and the diversity of its sources. Increasing exports of Belt and Road countries would help sustain the growth of Chinese exports. Chinese enterprises, however, are not highly experienced in investing overseas. There are lessons to be learned, 2 of the biggest being social sensitivities to local cultures and financial risk under unstable conditions. That's the real world, and that's closer to China.